Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the book of Romans by the Apostle Paul. And we are using Karl Barth's commentary, 7th edition, published in 1965. We're going to conclude chapter 12. We're going to look at 12 verses 10 through 18. And again, we are going to address practical theology or Christian ethics. And in this part 2 of Christian ethics, take a look at the block 2, note 4, and we'll have a little bit of an intro before we get started on this lesson by looking at Karl Barth's comments in block 2. Okay. Paul's ethical demands are direct and concrete, not merely theoretical, within the community of Christ. And the significance of this ethic lies in the form of charity, a form that recognizes Christ in others. In other words, Paul presents an ethics of recognition, an ethics of recognizing the realm of transcendence that the liberals denied. Remember the introduction. And even at the practical level, we have Paul affirming a dimension of ethics that is not readily observable to secular society. So keep those few comments by Barth in mind, and then we'll get started with the lesson. That kind of gives you a focal point for this second half of ethics. We're going to be looking at an ethics of recognition. So let's begin with block 1, verses 10, 11, and 12. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love, esteeming one another in honor, in diligence, not lagging in spirit, fervently serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, being patient in tribulation, being constant in prayer. And rejoicing in hope, that reminds me of something that Moltmann would pick up on with his theology of hope, his version of neo-orthodoxy. But let's look at Barth, and we have Barth's 10-point agape sacrificial love, or agape self-giving love, as the analog of election. The ethical act of agape self-giving love is analogous of the mystery of election. Remember, this whole chapters 9, 10, and 11 dealt with the mystery of election. Now Barth says, at the practical level, agape self-giving love, the act of agape is the analog of election. Positive ethics must negate the form of this world, negate its erotic course, negate its great error. And for Barth, we've discussed it before, but for Barth that meant protesting the rise of the Nazi regime, protesting Hitler. That was the environment within which Barth studied Romans. Negate its great error, according to the will of God, detached from eros love, seeking transcendence beyond our knowledge, a realm of transcendence, a realm of spirit denied by liberalism. And then Barth takes us to the concept of agape. And he has a few statements here beginning at 4G. Through agape, which is an act of worship. Agape, as love for the other, is a parable of our love towards God. Agape is the answer of the self under grace. And then finally, agape is the analog of election. So there you go. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 subpoints on the concept of agape for Christian ethics. Because for Karl Barth, that is an act of protest against the great error of culture and the great error of history, the great error in Germany under the rise of the Nazi regime. And so Barth says, agape, sacrificial love, is the analog of the mystery of election, which was discussed for 3 chapters in chapters 9, 10, and 11. Let's move on to block 2, recognizing Christ in the need of others, verses 13, 14, and 15. Contribute to the needs of the saints by pursuing hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. And now we get that comment we started with, Barth's 6-point ethics as Christological recognition. Paul's ethical demands are very direct and they are concrete. They are not merely theoretical. Within the community of Christ. And its significance lies in the form of charity, a form that recognizes Christ in others. Therefore, Paul proposes an ethics of recognition. In the midst of our existential struggle, honor is paid to God through the concept of agape. So again, Barth tells us that now Paul is becoming even more concrete than the first half of chapter 12. We're getting even more concrete because now we really are focusing Christian ethics down to a concept. We focus Christian ethics down to a Greek concept of agape, sacrificial, self-giving love. And Christ focused the commandments into a single commandment. He told his disciples just prior to the crucifixion, love one another as I have loved you. I leave you with one commandment, agape. I leave you with one concept, agape. Now, Karl Barth says Paul, in 12:10 through 18, is focusing Christian ethics into a concrete ethical concept of agape. Not a theoretical concept, but a concept, remember, that must be an act of praxis. And praxis in Greek is action and reflection within a particular concrete historical situation. It's not theoretical. Praxis is action in charity coupled with reflection within charity. It's action coupled with reflection. So it's the avenue of true wisdom, because true wisdom comes through actually working out our concepts, through positing those concepts through ethical action in the concrete world of existence. And for Barth, living in a Germany that had fallen into the idolatry of worshiping the German male citizen and looking at Hitler as a messianic figure, for Barth, that meant Christian ethics must protest the rise of the Nazi regime. Now for Karl Barth and for Dietrich Bonhoeffer, doing that meant putting their lives on the line. They were both exiled. Karl Barth remained in exile. Dietrich Bonhoeffer actually returned to the German underground and eventually was arrested, put in a concentration camp, and as we all know, he was executed in a German concentration camp just prior to the Allies liberating that camp. He died as a martyr for Jesus Christ. But Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer both took that Christian position of protest against the idolatry of men acting like God. Hitler acting like a messianic figure, demanding to be recognized as a messianic figure. Barth and Bonhoeffer both protested the rise of the Nazi regime. And in this lesson, Barth tells us that Christian ethics needs to be focused in the same concrete way as Christ himself left the disciples with a singular commandment: to love one another, agape, self-giving love. Let's move on to block 3, and now we really do look at an aspect of Paul and Barth that was picked up by the successor to Karl Barth, Jürgen Moltmann, and that's the making neo-orthodoxy even more apocalyptic, and interpreting Paul and interpreting Barth in a predominantly eschatological way. That is what Moltmann did. And Moltmann's theology was very definitely focused on making the theoretical concrete, and for basically his first 2 books dealt very specifically with Karl Barth's neo-orthodoxy, his Theology of Hope, and his second book, The Crucified God. And the second book, for me, is the book that has remained for me a favorite by Jürgen Moltmann. Let's take a look at block 3, Ethics as Eschatological Peace. Now the Greek concept, I'll say it again, the Greek concept for peace is eirene, and it means, in a very literal way, it means healing of fragmentation, healing of a fragmented society, healing of a fragmented self-identity. And a fragmented self-identity is a self-identity that has been broken in grace. And then that fragmentation is healed in Christ. Paul was broken in grace in the apocalypse of Damascus, and then through a retreat into the wilderness, that identity was healed of fragmentation through encounter with Christ. So we're going to be looking at ethics as eschatological peace, 16, 17, and 18. Be mindful of the same thing toward one another, not conceited, but with humility. Do not be wise and prideful within yourself. and toward no individual exchange evil for evil. Practice noble thought and noble action unto all persons. And then 18, with all persons continually, and he uses the participle, continually live in peace. He uses the participle there, Paul does. With all persons, live in a way that heals fragmentation. Continually live in a way that heals fragmentation. Let your life be a healing presence with others. Promote peace, promote harmony, promote unity, and agape. If you have to, do that through self-sacrificial agape type of love. Now, Barth's ethics as eschatological peace. Ethics is eschatological, with the enlisting of parabolic acts. Acts that bear witness to God's coming kingdom. And our great ethical disturbance is that Christ must increase as we decrease. It means dying to the old self in order that Christ might increase. We must avoid the great false towers. I love this by Barth. We must avoid the great false towers of romanticism and radical realism. They are idolatry. They are false high places. We must negate the mistaken demonstrations of war, especially in a Germany that was becoming very much perverted, demonic. War is fruitless. War is where men turn themselves into God or messianic figures like Adolf Hitler. We must affirm peace as an eschatological concept, peace for the coming world. And I agree with that completely from Karl Barth. And that is the type of writing from Barth that Jürgen Moltmann concentrated on when he wrote his Theology of Hope in German in 1965, later to be translated into English in 1967. But that book, The Theology of Hope, that shook the world just like Barth's commentary on Romans shook the world when it first came out. Barth's commentary on Romans had a dramatic impact on Christian theology when it was published for the first time. And Jürgen Moltmann, the successor to Karl Barth, that is a universally accepted statement. The successor to Karl Barth was, and will always remain Jürgen Moltmann. And his book, The Theology of Hope, was released in Germany in 1965, and it shook the entire world of Christian thought. And it was translated into many languages, but it made its way to America in 1967. And I got a first edition copy, which I have signed by Jürgen Moltmann when I met him at Baylor University. And it made a huge impact in America. But it created a little bit of a false utopia. And Moltmann wanted to correct that, so he immediately came out with a second book entitled The Crucified God to give a more concentrated substance to hope, to make hope concrete, like Paul and Barth are doing here in this lesson. And that's why, to me, when I go through this chapter 12 in Romans, I think of Jürgen Moltmann's book, his second book, The Crucified God. More than I think of his first book, I think of his second book, The Crucified God, because it became all about praxis, action, and reflection within a particular, concrete, historical situation. That's the definition of the Greek concept of praxis, Praxis. So we have a very important information here, a great finish to chapter 12. Our next lesson will be chapter 13, verses 1 through 9.